Hey there, it is Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Hey, what a pleasure to talk with Dr. Douglas Groothuis. He's got a brand new book out. It's called Fire in the Streets: How You Can Confidently Respond to Incendiary Cultural Topics. And he's got quite a library back there. And some of those, he told us before we went live, he's read twice. Doug, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being on with us. Yeah.
Yeah, and let me read this about Doug, if I may. He's a Christian philosopher. I don't know too many Christian philosophers, Doug, so this is awesome. Yeah. An apologist and an author of 15 books. He is currently the professor of philosophy at Denver Seminary, so it's good to have you. Some topics in the book include critical race theory, thinking from a Christian perspective. So first of all, Doug, talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into this book, because this is, I love what you're talking about in the book.
Right. Yes. Well, I've been a professor at Denver Seminary since 1993. I teach philosophy, so that includes apologetics, comparative religion, ethics, and so on. And my real passion is to bring biblical truth to the watching world and to equip the church to respond wisely to the cultural moment.
And that's something that the church needs is a way to respond, because there's so much going on in our world today that needs biblical response. So where do we start, Doug?
Well, what I try to start with is an understanding of how serious our situation is. And I go back to 2020 with those terrible riots that went on all summer. They were so bad that at the time I was in rural Alaska with my wife. I don't live there, but she has a log cabin there. And we really wondered if we wanted to go back to Denver. We didn't know if it would be safe to return to a big city. We did, but that's a serious crisis. So I'm a philosopher, so I wanted to get to the bottom of this in terms of ideas. And I realized that this was being animated directly or indirectly by something called critical race theory. So I kept being asked to do interviews about what's going on and the philosophy behind these riots and the calls to burn down America and so on. So I decided to write a book, and Salem was interested in it, Salem Books. And I actually pounded out the book in 4 months. I kind of surprised myself, but I was able to bring back a lot of material that I've studied over the years about politics, economics, biblical worldview, and so on. And the root of all this is in Marxism. And Marxism is a worldview from which nothing good comes. In fact, Marxism was responsible in the Soviet Union and in China and Cambodia for the deaths of perhaps 100 million people in the 20th century. The Black Book of Communism documents all that. And this is the state killing its own citizens. This is not deaths in wars. So Marxism is a conflict worldview. It says that history is the history of class struggle, class conflict, where the owners are against the workers, and the workers will eventually rise up against the owners who are exploiting them terribly. And there will be eventually a socialist society in which there'll be no class distinctions, no animosities, and so on. And we just look at the 20th century or the 21st century, think of Venezuela, and this never happens. So what happened with Marxism in the early 20th century, there are a group of Marxists in Frankfurt, Germany, who were looking at Marxism. They said, well, things haven't turned out the way Marx predicted. The revolutions have not been very successful. The workers are more content than we thought they would be. They're supposed to rise up against the owners. And a lot of workers, especially in the West and America, were fairly content with their wages, their property, their family. So they wanted to stir up more discontent. So you have thinkers like Herbert Marcuse, who said, you're really far more oppressed than you think. If you're a sexual minority, you're oppressed. If you're a person of color, you're oppressed. So you need to join the revolutionary vanguard. So out of this, you have Marxism, then critical theory, then the development of critical race theory. You add people like Kimberly Crenshaw and Ibrahim X. Kendi to the mix, and you have a very anti-American, socialist, dangerous ideology. So the reason I call the book Fire in the Streets is that there was literally fire in the streets
Mm-hmm.
in 2020. My dog just came in to check in, so everything's okay. He gave me the paws up.
Oh, good.
So I wanted to get to the bottom of this philosophically, and I think I did in the book. So the first chapter is called Fire in the Mind of Karl Marx and His Followers.
Wow. Doug Groothuis with us. The book is called Fire in the Streets. This is just fascinating what you're talking about. Has it been that we've just been, I mean, Marxism at its core is evil and unbalanced, but
Right.
we've forgotten about it somehow. How did it sift its way, sneak into our system with us? Were we sleeping or what? We just, what?
Well, some of us grew up during the Cold War, and I've been a conservative anti-communist for a long time, but I'm an old guy. I'm 65. A lot of younger people just don't know what Marxism is. They don't know what Marxism has done to tens of millions of people throughout history. They have a very rosy, unrealistic view of socialism. Socialism is wonderful. I mean, I heard AOC give this brilliant comment. Capitalism is about money, capital, and socialism is about society, people. So which one do you want? Oh my goodness. If I were grading that comment, it would be an F-. So I'm trying to bring some history and some philosophical analysis and a biblical worldview to all this. We really need to make sure people know what Marxism is, what it has done, and then this most recent version of it, which could be called cultural Marxism or neo-Marxism. And it's not just name calling to say, well, the root of this is Marxist, because you have Patrisse Cullors in a YouTube video a few years ago saying that she and another leader in Black Lives Matter were trained Marxists. That's the word she used, trained Marxists. Now, trained means we're activists, we're revolutionaries. And they were discipled by Angela Davis, who is a radical activist in the 70s, and she was discipled by Herbert Marcuse, the man I talked about earlier. So there's a chain of influence here, intellectually, culturally, and socially. And I'm very concerned about it because it is at root not a worldview compatible with Christianity. It views people in terms of their group membership. Well, are you white? Are you male? It's not individuals before God. It's an intrinsically socialist project. So the idea is society will not work itself out in any kind of a just way. So we have to have a top-down system that assures we have a certain kind of society. This has been called social engineering. It's based on identity politics. Who you are is mostly determined by your race or your sexual preference, and not simply being in the image of God or being an American citizen with rights. It really pits people, it pits classes against each other. Now, there has been, of course, racial strife, injustice, evil in terms of race in the United States. But what I say in the book is that America is a self-reforming system because its original principles and documents, that is the Declaration and the Constitution, are so strong. But see, the critical race theory people think that America is essentially flawed, racist from the beginning, and the Constitution is really a fraud. It was written by dead white males who were slave owners. So you have to reject it. Now, my view is that while our founding documents are not perfect and the Constitution allowed for slavery, although it didn't endorse it, that you have in these documents a strong root system that leads to or can lead to good reforms. I also want to put the lie to the idea that the Constitution says that African Americans are 3/5 human. And Whoopi Goldberg was on television recently, I'm told. I wouldn't watch her even if you paid me. But I'm told that she said, what are we going to do? Go back to where African Americans are 1/4 the human? She got the fraction wrong.
Right.
But anyway, the 3/5 clause was a compromise between the North and the South to get a working constitution. And the North wanted to limit the voting power of the South by only giving the slaves, but the word slave is never used in the Constitution, only giving enslaved people 3/5 representation. The South wouldn't let them vote anyway. So this was actually a way of diminishing Southern power with the hopes that eventually slavery would be abolished. And it was.
Wow. And so, Doug, how do we, as the church, applying a biblical worldview, how do we as the church start to battle this? Because I think it seems like the church is almost afraid to say anything because we're going to, stir up strife and hurt people's feelings.
We first of all need to be knowledgeable about what's going on, the roots of it. We need to have courage. We need to have a backbone and speak up. I was asked yesterday, I think it was Janet Parshall asked me, why did you write this book? And I said, well, I needed more enemies. I say some things in the book that a lot of folks will not like, but the idea is I give arguments, I give facts, I have 500 footnotes for 200 pages. So if you think I'm wrong about my critique of critical race theory or my proposal to try to stay true to the American creed, you need to give me arguments against what I have said. So I need to be knowledgeable about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have the courage of our convictions. And we need to be activists. We need to be knowledgeable activists, not just people out in the street with a big banner, who's got the most clever banner, but who has the best worldview and who has some kind of strategy. And I focus quite a bit on education because critical race theory gets into our society primarily through education, state education. So we need to monitor that. And I think we need a strong Christian school movement, a strong homeschool movement. And we see that. As I said, I'm an old guy. 40 years ago, the idea of Christian schools and homeschooling was rather novel. It was a very small percentage. And I've been arguing this for 40 years. And after COVID and after the revelation of how much critical race theory is influencing our schools, a lot of parents are saying, yes, Christian schools and homeschooling is the better option because we need to educate according to a Christian worldview, not just, leave a little space for God here and there,
right,
but argue and present the Christian worldview as pertinent to every discipline, every aspect of life.
Doug Groothuis, the book is out and you can get it Fire in the Streets. There is his website there, douglasgroothuis.com. Doug, I don't know if you've ever thought about doing comedy, but you're very funny as well.
That's what my wife tells me.
So check out the book. Doug, if you're up for it, we'd love to catch up with you in the fall. What an amazing book. Thank you for being brave, standing up, standing out, and look forward to talking to you again. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.